that you people have chosen, and I'm very happy that I got the opportunity to come here and speak on this occasion. Talking about multidisciplinary approach in social sciences, this is quite close to my heart because in fact currently two of my colleagues in IIM Indore, one Professor Swapnil who is in strategy area, and another Professor Sneha who is in economics area. We three, belong to three different backgrounds. Me, political science and China studies. Professor Sneha is an environmental economist, and Professor Swapnil is strategic management area. And three of us have come together, and in the last 2.5 years, working on very focused scheme that how do we come up with a new kind of pedagogical methods through which we can make business ethics education more relevant and more interesting for students. This is what we have been doing, and the journey has been wonderful to say the least. So what I will do is, I will first in the initial few minutes, I will share my experiences as a business ethics instructor, and then the next half I would like to share with you the research that we have done, which ultimately led, the first part of that research has been published in the Journal of Business Ethics 1 year back. And I'm going to talk about our journey and what did we do and what kind of an alternative research and pedagogical method that we have come up with in the process of our research. Currently we are in the second part of our research and we are working on that. I'll share tidbits about that as well. I started teaching business ethics in 2010 when I joined IIM Kozhikode. I was taken in IIM Kozhikode as a China specialist, but once I was in, I realized that China is alone not going to take me through as a faculty in the IIM system. I have to make a mark for myself in one of the core areas of management, and because I have a political science background, and I'm pretty passionate about ethics and values, so therefore I thought that business ethics is perhaps the most, most close to me, and that is where I can perhaps do something about. But I'm very, very frank, I didn't know a word about business ethics. Ethics is fine, but business ethics, that was something which was a very difficult thing to do. So in the first year when I taught, like if you go to any of the business ethics textbooks, any basic one, Western, Western authors authored, or Indian authored, you will see the first 3 chapters. There is a title called Approaches to Business Ethics, and then you will have all those heavy loaded words like teleology, deontology, and whatnot. And then you come across people like Immanuel Kant and Jeremy Bentham. So people, students in management education just get aghast. So my first reality check was that. So one day when I finished, delivering a lecture on teleology, deontology, at the end of the class, one of my students came and said, "Sir, all this is fine, but what is it that, management students have got to do with this?" And I was really, perplexed, and frankly speaking, I managed to squeeze myself out of that situation, but I knew that my answer was not convincing. And ever since, I have been trying to see how I can basically make this subject more relevant for my students. And the journey has been very challenging. I'm a long way off from the destination. Perhaps I'll never reach there, but the journey is on, and it's quite an exciting journey. Tidbits of which I will share with you. So this is one. So what did the first thing I decided then was that I am not going to do something which makes no sense to my audience, no matter how relevant it is. So therefore, what I did was I straight away decided that I am going to read as much as possible, not from any other sources, but from the top-notch ethics journals in the field of management. So immediately after that course got over, I had a harrowing time. And then later I started reading out through web and reading, reaching out to others who are teaching ethics and discussing a lot and reading a lot, most importantly. And I decided I'm not going to read any basic textbook on ethics. What I'm going to do, business ethics, what I'm going to do is read Journal of Business Ethics Quarterly, Business Ethics, European Review, in Journal of Business Ethics Education. So I decided, what are the last 10 years journals on business ethics, pedagogy and management education talking about? And that is how I started. And it was very, very important to engage in that very difficult exercise, but still very, rewarding, because one of the things which one could know from that is, of course, you have your own share of Enron crisis, you have your own share of Arthur Andersen, you have your own share of WorldCom, you have your own share of 2008 financial crisis, you have your share of Volkswagen and Satyam and all that. But nevertheless, ethics, business ethics is so important. And I came across numerous examples how organizational cultures are built around ethics and ethical value systems. And one way in which it helped me was, whenever I used to talk something in the class, students, like asking examples. That's our example. So immediately I had an example. So gradually I was rooted in my discipline, but at the same time I started adapting myself to the field of management education. And over a period of time, I started getting a hang of it, and hopefully my students will be able to answer that better, whether I am doing a decent job. I started having some very few basic questions in the first class itself. For example, students come with the impression that business ethics is an oxymoron. A very fashionable statement, oxymoron. Business and ethics cannot go together. That is the first thing. So I say, let's take this head on. The second thing is, my value systems are already established. मुझे सब पता है क्या सही है क्या गलत है, अब हमको कोई सुधार नहीं सकता है. I'm fine. That is the second thing. And third thing is, students come with a preconceived notion that ethics is morality. So in the first class itself, I start, and then इसको पढ़ के क्या होगा? So these are the four basic challenges we face. And then I try to address them right in the first class. Not necessarily in the order which I raised, but so for example, इसको पढ़ के क्या होगा? इसको पढ़ के क्या होगा? I mean, people after doing engineering, they write CAT. तो engineering पढ़ के क्या होगा? कुछ नहीं होगा. अब स्कूल में चार्ल्स लॉ, बॉयस लॉ पढ़े थे, पढ़ के क्या होगा? कुछ नहीं होगा. So to come forward, by specializing in marketing, you don't become a Philip Kotler, do you? तो marketing क्यों पढ़ रहे हो? By doing financial derivatives course, you don't become a George Soros. By doing strategy management courses, you don't become Michael Porter. So then why are you asked, why have such an instrumentalist view about education? ये करने से ये होगा, ये करने से ये होगा, ये करने से ये होगा. That is something, we as instructors and as students also, it's never too late. But we cannot have an instrumentalist purpose for each and everything in education, including management education. Management education is no different from others. We are not in an island, right? We are in the society. Another important question that, coming back to this distinction between morality and ethics is pretty interesting. I asked, or I'm asking you also, when you were in your school, you did moral science, isn't it? You did not do ethical science. But when you come to business schools, you do business ethics, you don't do business morals. Similarly, corporate organizations today, they have chief ethical officer. They don't have a chief moral officer. Some of the extreme right-wing organizations do have chief moral officer. But chief ethics officers, compliance or ethical compliance officer, why not moral compliance officer? Is there a difference between ethics and morality? And last but not the least, people have this notion that ethics though is all about sermonizing. No, it's not. Because the preconceived notion is, you talk about the only idealistic things in the world. And how do we counter that? I'll give you two examples. There are many examples I can right now, because of time I'll give you two examples. It seems, there was a massive police raid in one of the drug-infested towns in Sicily. Sicily is in Italy. And so therefore there was a massive raid, and all kinds of things were recovered. But one of the interesting things that were recovered was, for lack of a better term, the HR recruitment policy document of that mafia. And right in the first clause it is written, those of you who wish to join us should have a high degree of loyalty. Loyalty. So even, mafia needs ethics. I'll give another example. Many of you, some of our older colleagues are sitting here. I don't know how many of you would have seen or interested in Amitabh Bachchan's movies of 70s and 80s. There is this famous movie called Zanjeer. Amitabh Bachchan is the police guy and Pran, the great actor, he is the villain. So these are the two protagonists, and in one of the scenes, it is Pran the villain who saves, Amitabh Bachchan the inspector. And then Amitabh Bachchan says, "देख के अच्छा लगा कि चोरों के भी उसूल होते हैं." And then Pran retorts by saying that चोरों के भी नहीं, चोरों के ही तो उसूल होते हैं. So so there are a lot of gray zones. And last, I mean again, there are so many lasts here. So the point is that the idea of teaching ethics to you, first of all, business ethics, is not about telling you what is right and what is wrong. That is what you did in school. The idea of telling you what is, in ethics, business ethics, is that when I ask you how do you respond in such situation when you confront an ethical dilemma, you have a knee-jerk reaction and you take a certain standpoint. But you yourself don't know why are you doing what you are doing. So business ethics education, basically, one of the primary motives is to make you think internally. Why do you do what you do? And once you do that, you will see that there are multiple perspectives of doing this and approaching a certain ethical dilemma. And that basically makes you more sympathetic and empathetic to others' concerns. Because once you, so for example, if I say, that there are two things. One is ethical decision making. One is, how do you do ethical decision making? There are two aspects of it. One is the external ecosystem. So before taking any decision, you should ensure that you're listening to all the stakeholders, you know about all the things that are happening outside. But then, there is another ecosystem, and that is the internal ecosystem within you. How, you can put yourself in others' shoes. How, you think that, who will get harmed by something what you do, who will get benefited. All these things are, so ethical business ethics education is about, informed decision making. And when I say informed decision making, it's informed decision making not on the basis of external ecosystem, but your own internal ecosystem, and that is informed decision making. So, so these are some of the things that I wanted to share with you. Now I'll come back to what our research method, the integrated live case approach is the approach that we call this as. So it was 2015, February 23rd, I joined IIM Indore, and then in the same month, another colleague joined, Professor Swapnil. And as we were having a walk, somewhere around September, latter half of September, so after September 18th. September 18th is a very critical date. September 18th is the date 2015 when the world came to know about the Dieselgate scandal of Volkswagen. That a defeat device was planted and etc. etc. So then, the second term was going on. We teach ethics in the second term. And he was telling us, so what do you do in ethics? And then that is how our conversation started. And that conversation actually has led us very far today, where we are collaborating on very interesting things. We ended up writing a case on Volkswagen itself, the Dieselgate scandal, and it's registered in our case center. So, when I started talking to him, I realized that he posed me very, very challenging questions. And then, we came to work on it. And today, we have come up with a new kind of pedagogical approach, which is called the integrated live case approach. It's not an approach. Integrated live case is an ethical pedagogical, business ethics pedagogical method. So how did we come across this method? And why do we feel that it is different from the existing methods? There are traditionally two methods of teaching business ethics. One is the lecture mode and another is the case method. For our purposes, we feel that the case method and the lecture method both are belonging to the purview of traditional delivery systems. Nowadays, you have contemporary delivery methods. For example, role play, simulation, and and this is one approach that we said we have come with an alternative approach, integrated live case framework or method. So this is the integrated live case approach that we are talking of. So what did we do? To satisfy ourselves of some of the questions that we raised in the process of research, we went through 408 articles in top-notch business ethics journals during the period 2005 to 2015. We focused on that. So therefore, we did an extensive review of literature, and we went to leading ethics journals such as Journal of Business Ethics Quarterly, Business Ethics European Review, Journal of Business Ethics Education, so therefore we went through all this. Then we went on, in all these journals, we searched for articles on education and articles on ethics. We also went through some of the management pedagogy journals on education, like the Academy of Management Learning and Management Learning. So the review was done in multiple stages. The first stage, we read through the abstracts of the 408 articles, and then we came across what are these articles talking about, and we call them domains. So these domains that these articles focused on, they were clubbed under three things, namely approach, content, and delivery. Yeah. So then what is approach? What is approach? Approach is basically that which outlines the philosophical stance adopted in a certain paper, whether it is normative or positive. What do you mean by normative or positive? Normative means basically the approach is something which is theory laden, which is norm based, or the approach is somewhat based on real world connectedness. Real world connectedness. Second domain is content. So when we are talking of content, we are talking of two things basically. One is the depth and another is the breadth. So therefore, if I am talking of, say for example, something like teleology or utilitarianism or deontology, I go to the in-depth study. How do I look at a certain ethical dilemma? And then another way of looking at it is, which the case method does, is through breadth. So therefore you have an ethics course. So therefore one session is based on ethics in HR. Another session is based on ethics in marketing. Another session is based on ethics in finance, etc., etc. So therefore you cover a wide gamut of topics through case method. The third is delivery. How do you deliver what depending on the approach and depending on the content? Our research says that unconsciously, subconsciously, whatever the teacher does on the basis of the approach that he or she has adopted and the content that he or she has brought in, you automatically bump into a certain kind of delivery system. So for example, if you are going by the lecture method or the theory method, then that your approach is theory laden. So then what that leads to is basically depth. And once you go for depth, then you basically are functioning under the assumption that I am on the sage of the stage. So therefore the delivery mechanism also happens to be traditional lecture-based method. This is just to give you a small example. So therefore, the approach is all about where, what, which. So it is a philosophical stance adopted by the paper, and it traces the origin of the motivation for the ethics pedagogy course. So core philosophy, whether it is normative or positive, what is the viewpoint of the instructor or the author, where is the paper situated in the spectrum ranging from overarching frameworks and the gambit of business operations. So the ultimate aim is to develop robust skill sets in participants to integrate ethical concepts into practice. So if you look at, for example, I'll just give one example because there's lack of time. If you look at theory laden, for example, the origin is normative philosophical stance. That is, and then where building on core theories by focusing on theoretical coverage and critical thinking. And then the tools. What are the tools that you use? The tools that you use are literature, historical facts, and frameworks. What are the problems with this approach? The problem is there is an oversight of the real world applications. You tell students that this is what Kant said, this is what Bentham said, this is what he or she said, John Rawls said, but then say, so what? That's where it ends. If you look at the widely used case study method, the focus is application of frameworks to real world issues. So okay, we are doing the Johnson & Johnson Tylenol crisis, so therefore the Tylenol should be recalled or not by James Burke, CEO. Decision making. So, however, when you put students in decision making, and some students will tell retrospective effect. Now you know what James Burke would have done. The most important thing is, no, he should have recalled product, he should not, compromise with public health. Very easily said than done. So what are we doing in the class? So breadth, when you are talking of breadth, the case-based method is also challenged in certain ways. So therefore, the challenge is basically, to supplement case-based method also with certain kind of theoretical rigor as well. Otherwise, you don't know why you are saying what you are saying. And more importantly, breadth also depends on the situation. Are you talking of breadth? Say, for example, in a huge business organization, you have different business functions. You have marketing, you have strategy, you have finance, you have HR. So therefore, are you talking of all the internal stakeholders? Or you are also talking of external stakeholders like government and NGOs, which have become very, very important in today's world. Or are you talking of individual alone, or you are talking of business alone, or you are talking society alone? But we know that in the real world, any individual alone cannot make a difference. Any good organization alone cannot make a difference, and society alone also cannot make a difference. So we need an integrated approach. So now we are done with the approach, that is where, what, and which. Now the question is who. So now that I have adopted a certain pedagogical tool which is theory-laden or real connectedness, the next question is whether I will go for the depth or whether I will go for the breadth. How do I go about doing it? So therefore the questions are, who is the primary SSE? Who comprises the primary constituency? Individuals, organization, or society? And then, what is the primary function or objective that is under the scanner? So, it can encompass theoretical frameworks and concepts as well as applications in decision making and management practices. Now, again, if I go by depth, which I am taking the theory line again to give an example. In the theory, you are at most talking of one or at most, two, nothing more than that. Now, if you look at who, ethics courses are designed for critical scrutiny of one or two particular management functions. So, for example, let's say that if I am talking of shareholders theory and the stakeholders theory. So, shareholders theory, Milton Friedman, he said that the only business of business is to do business. So, this is the theory. And the stakeholder theory by Edward Freeman, he talks about four things, that is the separation fallacy, integration thesis, responsibility principle, and open question argument. Fine. No. So what? So, ethics courses designed for critical scrutiny of one or two particular management functions. The focus is, only on one or two constituencies. They are quite detailed. Assessment of only the focal subject. So everything else in the ecosystem is given a pass. So what happens here? The gap, there is a gap. The gap is lack of focus on interlinkages across business functions. Therefore, it lacks a comprehensive view. Similarly, if I look at the gap in the case method, they are topical, as I said, ethics in HR. Any business organization does not function only on the basis of HR. Similarly, any ethical climate, any kind of ethical climate in any organization does not get built only by marketing people or by strategy people. So you need a very strong functional kind of linkages. So sometimes institutions, business organizations can also come with ethical breakdowns, not because they are unethical, but perhaps the organizational communication between between the various functional areas in a certain organization is not healthy. So that that communication gap has led to the ethical breakdown. And the third question is, as I said, now approach and content is there. Third is D, delivery. So, okay, I have decided that I will go for the theory laden and I will go for the depth. Now, as I told you earlier, our research shows us that invariably, what kind of delivery mechanism one instructor adopts is subconsciously bound into or unconsciously also bound into, depending on what approach and content he or she has chosen. So therefore, one is lecture-based method, and another is the case-based method, and there also you have problems. So therefore, our ACD is what we call our ACD framework. What is this ACD framework? Step 1. So first, if business ethics pedagogy, when you are designing, and let me tell you, one of my colleagues, Professor Swapnil, with whom I was working, recently he presented a paper how this ILC can be used to overcome some of the deficiencies which have been raised by the strategic management faculty. How do we teach strategic management better? And in the strategic management forum, he said how ILC as an approach can be used even in strategy, not only in ethics. So ethics is only one way through which we are, bringing this forward. So where are you in your philosophical stance? That is how you start with. Second question is, who is your primary constituency? And third is, how do you plan to teach the course? So our ACD framework is based on the typical approach thus far. So approach is theory laden and real world. Then you go to content, which again is depth and breadth, and again you have delivery. So therefore you see each one gets connected to the other. So where are you in your philosophical stance? Who is your primary constituency? How do you plan to teach the course? Now we come to defining the ILC. So we said that why don't we come up with something which basically, all the pedagogical methods, so we call, approach, we have two binaries, we call them binaries. So this is approach and these are binaries. So we have 6 binaries or 3 pairs of binaries. So therefore we said that business ethics pedagogy, doesn't do justice to all the binaries. So why an exhaustive method, pedagogical method has to be there which takes care of all the binaries. There will be theory, there will be case. There will be depth, there will be breadth. There will be traditional delivery, and then there will be also the innovative techniques that are to be there, like role play or model United Nations kind of sessions. Etc. etc. So therefore, defining ILC in the backdrop of the above discussion, we would define ILC as a contemporary pedagogy which integrates approach, content, and delivery, and characterized with no retrospective bias. This is very important because most of our students nowadays, if you give them a case, some of the greatest cases are timeless. Even if authored in 60s, they make a lot of sense even today. But unfortunately, such cases are few in number. So most of the time, students say, "Arey, ye to 1960s में हुआ था, 70s में था, हमको क्या लेना देना? अमेरिका में हुआ था, UK में हुआ था, France में हुआ था." So there is certain kind of disconnect which students have. So now retrospective. Now, but if I take the case of Volkswagen, every day it is coming in the news. Every day the students are reading it. You can find out from Google. And nowadays the students, they are very much attracted to use laptop, very much attracted to, enticed to use mobiles in the class. So therefore we also thought that this is an interesting way of getting students engaged. We will ask students to get chalo le aao, laptop le aao, mobile le aao, jo lena hai le aao. Divide them into groups and say ki chalo, you go to New York Times or you go through Google search engine and you find out anything and everything that you can about Volkswagen's Dieselgate scandal. And tell me who are the individuals that you are responsible. I am not going to tell you, you tell me. Okay, so you come up with the few names, James Liang, you come up with Martin Winterkorn, and then you come up with Wolfitz. Okay, so then who do you think is responsible? Even today, after so many things I have written, we don't know for sure whether Martin Winterkorn actually knew that there has been a defeat device that is planted. But does it mean that he really didn't know? Is it possible? Don't know. Because, the first time where this defeat device was implanted was actually in Audi division. And as soon as Martin Winterkorn came here, and Audi was doing extremely well, and when Martin Winterkorn was promoted from Audi to overall global CEO of Volkswagen, he got his team of Audi guys here, which means that let's repeat the same thing by implication. And then finally one finding says, and Martin Winterkorn is not someone, he's a perfectionist. If you go to YouTube and all, you type his name, you will see that, he always used to roam around with a tape, measuring tape in his pocket. Measuring exactly the length and size and all those details. Very detailed person. He will not know. So no retrospective bias. So the good thing is, the case is going on and you don't know what is its conclusion. Like you say that case method mein, sir, finally kya hua? But इसमें तो पता है किसी को नहीं पता है क्या होगा. Possessing temporal proximity. This is what I was talking about. It is happening right in front of your eyes. If I tell you that in 1970s, James Burke, decided to withdraw Tylenol tablet because